Imagine looking up and God gives you a vision, a glimpse at heaven. What do you think you would see? Now, before you answer, you want to hear what the Apostle John said. Don't worry about what John says, because if God gave you a vision of heaven today in the 21st century, it would probably look quite different from what John saw in the first century. Throughout biblical history, from Genesis to Revelation, the descriptions of heaven in Scripture were always changing, from the simple to the more complex. As humanity changed, the images of heaven likewise changed. In the beginning, they imagined going back to the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve had been kicked out of Eden. They wanted to get back in to that garden. Later, they began to talk about the heavenly tabernacle. Moses built this fancy tent to worship God. It was patterned after the tabernacle of heaven. When they started building more permanent structures for their homes and their cities, then the talk was of a heavenly temple. As Psalm 23, David writes, I want to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now, by the time you get to the end of the first century, John talks about a great walled city. Now, why does the description of heaven change throughout biblical history? If you're imagining it's because of ongoing construction and God just kept building and building, no. It's a simple answer. When God describes heaven, whether in vision or in revelation words, when God describes heaven, he uses earthly imagery to describe something that is beyond our experience on earth. There is no exact parallel between heaven and earth. So what God does, in each generation, he uses things you know and recognize and says, well, heaven's kind of like that. They're analogies of heaven, not actual descriptions of heaven. And the imagery will change as mankind changes. As civilization becomes more complex, the imagery of heaven becomes more complex. So for John, a great walled fortress, because that's how they built cities back in those days, put this big wall to keep an enemy invader out. But who knows what a vision of heaven might look like today? It might be more along the lines of a New York City with giant skyscrapers reaching high into the sky. You see, the imagery of Scripture should not be read literally. When it describes heaven, it's giving you a picture from the generation of that time to help them understand something about heaven. So what you do is you take the literal description and set it aside and look at it as symbols and figure out the meaning of those symbols. And once you do that, you'll understand what God was trying to say about heaven. Now, once you've done that, you can then take the literal and just imagine it. Imagine what it would be like if it was actually like that. But remember, when you get to heaven, it may or may not be like the picture. The picture was an earthly picture to convey something that's not earth. It's something different. Now, if you don't know how to figure out the meaning of symbols, that's fine. I'm here to help you with that. So let's get into our text. Revelation 21, verse 9, John says, one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls full of the seven last plagues, he came and he spoke with me. Now, throughout the book of Revelation, as John goes through his various visions, he will encounter many angels. The angels he's referring to here are the seven angels of Revelation 15 and 16. They had seven bowls of plagues. Now, in every vision, one of the angels will step out of the vision, if you will, and offer to guide John, to give him some kind of help in understanding the vision. So here's one of those angels doing that. He says to John, come here, I'm going to show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Is he talking about the church? Well, yes and no. He's not so much going to show the church. Rather, what he's going to show is what the church is going to experience when it gets to heaven. When Jesus returns and gathers his bride and takes us home, what will that be like for us? That's the question he's answering. So he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain. Now, when John uses that phrase, he carried me away in the Spirit, he's borrowing from the prophet Ezekiel. Throughout his book, Ezekiel receives several visions, and each vision he begins it this way, I was in the Spirit. It refers to some kind of prophetic trance. I imagine where the body just remains motionless, and the Spirit takes off and goes and experiences what it experiences, and it's so real, it's the five senses kicking in, as if you can see, hear, taste, smell, touch, and yet your body was back where it was. Your spirit is off into the vision. Well, John gets taken away into a vision of heaven. He says that he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, and it was coming down out of heaven from God. Now, that's actually a repeat of what we've already read in verse 1. Verse 1 was the intro, and then he digressed to other statements. Now he's back where he left off. He's ready to describe the vision of heaven, give you the details. He says, the city had the glory of God. And you can mark that as a clue to the rest of the chapter, because everything John describes is going to sparkle and shine. And that's not a coincidence, because the sparkle and shine is a symbol of God's glory, God's radiant glory. And that represents his presence, because wherever you can see the glory of God, you know it's coming from God. You know that God is present. And that's the essence of heaven, is to be drawn into the presence of God. He says regarding the city, its brilliance was like a very costly stone, like a crystal clear jasper stone. Now, the Greek word jasper refers basically to our diamond. So heaven looks like a giant diamond sparkling in the sun. Now, that's a description he's already used earlier in Revelation chapter 4 when he was describing God. God was sitting on the throne. He looked like a jasper stone, a diamond shining. He looked kind of like a sardius stone, that's ruby red, an emerald, that's green, and then he throws in the rainbow, all the colors. God radiates all the spectrum of colors, and they come shining bright, well, as John says, shining like a diamond. That's how he describes the city, which radiates the glory of God. He says the city had a great and high wall. Now, he'll later give you the dimensions, but first think about a wall. Now, that was typical of John's day to build walls around city. It's fortress mentality. Not sure how relevant that would be for today, because in modern warfare, the city walls wouldn't keep an enemy out. They'll just fly their jets right over and drop the bombs. But if we go back to John's day and imagine the walls, I think we can get the meaning, get the idea. He says, on the walls were 12 gates, and at the gates were 12 angels. And names were written on the gates, the names of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel. Now we're getting some good symbols. First, gates on the walls. Gates are a symbol of admission. Come on in. They can also be a symbol of rejection. As you close those gates, stay out. Works both ways. He speaks of 12, and that's the real key that you need to pick up on. 12. 12 gates, 12 angels, 12 tribes. Back in Bible prophecy, the number 12 was a symbol for God's people. If you want to talk about all the people of God, you use the number 12 in a vision or prophecy. Now, why 12? Because the 12 tribes of Israel, that was the people of God. Later in the New Testament, the 12 apostles representing the people of God. The number 12 is a symbol of God's people. Now, he goes on to say, you've got 12 gates, and they're facing all directions. 3 to the east, 3 to the north, 3 to the south, and 3 to the west. You can pick up on that one quickly, can't you? Because that's all compass directions, which really is a great picture of the Great Commission. The Great Commission said, take the gospel to every nation of the world, all 4 corners of the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And here is heaven welcoming in from all directions people who put their faith in Jesus Christ. He says the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones. Now, I used to picture when I was a kid, foundation like the large foundation upon which a building is built. And I pictured you lay a foundation and then heaven must put another one, another one, another. No. Don't think of that kind of foundation. Think of something more like a cornerstone. Cornerstone is that special stone, precision cut, like 90-degree angle, so that as you set it in the corner, you can run a line. And then from that line, you can build the wall going both directions. Do that on each corner, and you could have a perfectly square city. In this case, you've got the 4 corners, plus you've got some other precision-made stones spread throughout the wall so that as the line runs, it once again lines up the line so accurately. 12 of these stones all around the walls of the city. Now, on these foundation stones were written the 12 names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb, and you can see we're back to that number 12. 12 stones, 12 names, 12 apostles. In other words, once again, he's saying heaven, that's the gathering of all God's people. And to do 12 tribes and 12 apostles in this vision, really captures the Old Testament saints and the New Testament saints. They're all there. That's a good way of picturing heaven. Heaven is when God gathers his people home. Nobody gets missed, even you. No matter how small, insignificant you might think you are, God gathers all his people, all the saints, Old Testament, New, and brings them together around his throne. Now, each of those people that are gathered there in John's vision, they all imagined heaven in different ways. Some picture a garden, others a tent, a tabernacle, a temple, a city, and maybe you and I something even more modern than all of that. But it doesn't matter how you picture heaven, they were all thrilled to be gathered together around the throne of God. Keep that in mind. It doesn't matter what heaven really looks like. What matters is that you're there, gathered with all the saints, standing in the presence of the Lord. Now that's what heaven is going to be.